Okay, so before we get started in setting up Redux and everything, let's just do one quick change real quick. In the last video, I actually forgot to rename this since I renamed this component to reset amount. Let me rename the file name as well. And VS Code should take care of the import. So if we go to app, we should see reset. Oh, actually didn't take care of the import. So let's kind of do that right now, reset amount. And let's move these guys up. Okay, perfect. Awesome. So now let's start talking about Redux. Now, Redux is a state management tool. And for the purposes of this app, it's pretty complex and way overkill. But the whole purpose of this tutorial is to teach you how to start using state management. So when you're working on much larger apps, say you're working on an enterprise level app at your day job, or you're working on a very large freelance project, you'll know how to use Redux. So let's get started. Let's open up our terminal. And first, we're going to add a couple of dependencies. We're going to a couple of packages. We're going to add Redux, and we're also going to add React-Redux. Cool. Once that's all set up, let's start talking about how Redux works, or rather React Redux works. Redux will actually help you manage your state on a component, or sorry, a app wide level, meaning all of your data or state will live in the outermost wrapper of your app. So that means you, instead of like what we're doing here, going through props into the components, which is also called prop drilling, we can just go into the components themselves and call that state. So that'll mean that there's no more prop drilling involved. This is very simple, so we're just kind of going down one level. But when you have a very complex app, so you have like 4 components within each other, you're going to be going into each component and passing this through. And that's where prop drilling gets really messy and really complicated. And that's where you want to reach for something like Redux. So let's dive right in. So we're going to go into our app.js file, and we're going to call what's called a provider. It's going to be from React Redux. And provider is going to live outside of our app. And right now, we're not going to see any changes really. Let's go in here. We have our providers, as you can see, and then context provider. And you'll see that it has a few props has children, which is this guy right here. And then it has store, which we're going to talk about in a sec. And then it also has memo. And you'll see that we have this memoized state coming from just the native React. And we have store, which we'll talk about right now. So store is where the store for where all your data or state will live. So stores will need a thing called a reducer. So let's create a reducer. So let's go into our source folder, and just type in reducers. And in here, we are going to create a reducer. So let's call it export. Actually, before we get into reducers, let's talk about what we want to do. We want to be able to add amount, reset amount, and then also set and get local storage and keep our data there, or keep our state there. So, and then we want to not have to pass down these props. We want to be able to just hook up to the Redux state inside here and also dispatch the actions we want to do. Now, actions are essentially what they sound like. So an action could be add amount, and it'll do something that modifies the state or updates the state. So let's start with our reducers. So we want to have a reducer and call it amount reducer. Let's do that. Let's export first. Let's export this and then do an arrow function. Call it amount reducer. And reducers take in 2 parameters. They take in the state and then taking an action. And now you'll often see this state having a default parameter in a lot of the Redux applications you'll come across. So in our state, let's see what we want our initial state to be. For example, we had our initial state right here, which was just a count of 0. Now you'll see that when we were using just React hooks, we had our initial state as 0. So let's do that. Count is 0. Now we can also actually abstract that out. And initial state as count 0. And we can just name that here. Perfect. And now a reducer is going to actually have a switch case that will return different things based on the action type. So we're going to switch case action type. And first one should be add amount. And so we're going to do something like this. And you can really have any type of casing you want, but what seems to be the standard is capital snake casing, just like this. And another thing that seems to be very standard is actually creating enums out of it. So we can have add amount equal to now this way you can let your IDE or code editor actually dictate how it's spelled, and you won't have to worry about misspelling it. So now we're just calling add amount, and it's going to return this guy. Cool. So when there's when the action type is add amount, what do we want to do? We want to return a new object, which is going to mirror our state, and then just override the thing we want to override it. So we don't ever want to mutate the state, meaning we don't ever want to change the original state. We always want to return a new one. So what we do is we spread in the initial state, and then we change the one thing we want to change, and then have it return a completely new object. So in this case, we want the count to be the initial count plus whatever our action amount is adding. So in this case, it's going to be state.count plus action.amount. Awesome. And I think we can kind of make this easier to read. Let's declare count up here. And got this, paste it here. So it would be like this. But with ES6, you can just use this as a shorthand, which is going to essentially say count is count. And then we have a default case. In this case, if nothing is passed in through the action, or if the action type is defined, we're simply going to return our state. Cool. Now we have another case, which is our reset amount, as you'll see right here. Cool. So in the reset amount, we want to case. Let's declare another enum. Not type today. Okay, cool. Case is reset amount. We want to return state, and then count will be 0. Cool. Okay, and we have this reducer, and we want to export it, or we have this amount reducer. So this will essentially be our store, because we don't really have anything else going on. We just have this count parameter, or count state that we're dealing with. Later on, when we get into authentication and stuff, we'll have like an auth or is logged in state and so forth, and we'll create another reducer for that. But for this is all we need. So we are going to just copy this guy and go back into our app.js, and we're going to import this thing called create store. Or actually, before we do that, let's just from Redux, and you'll see this thing called create store. And we need to declare our store before we and pass it through. So we're going to have const store equals create store. And this takes a parameter of a reducer. So we're going to import the reducer. Let's see if we can actually do this here. Let's call it amount reducer. Perfect. Yep, it imports it pretty easily. And let's kind of clean this up a little bit more. Let's move our assets down and move our components to a separate line. Okay, cool. So we have the store. And all we do is pass the store in as a prop named store. And so you'll see that we can, let's run this guy first. Yarn start. Okay, perfect. So now we're seeing that we have this provider and it has a dispatch and we have get state and so forth. So right now we have nothing going on, but what we can do is actually, we'll see, we saw that there's a, a get state function right here. We can actually go in and get state. So let's console log store.get state. See what happens. Sweet. We have this count of 0 because that's our initial state. Cool. So now the question is, how do we modify state? Modifying state is fairly easy. It's done through these thing called dispatches. And what you do is you dispatch an action. And let's get into that right now. So now what we can do is start connecting these components to Redux. And that's done pretty simply through connect that comes with React Redux. Now, what we essentially want to do is connect our component to the state and to be able to dispatch actions through this component. So right now we're passing in this add amount prop, but what we really want to do is pass in the add amount prop through the Redux store rather than through a parent component. So what we'll do right now is declare this thing called map dispatch to props. And that takes in an argument of dispatch. Oops. And then it returns an object. Actually, in here, we're going to create this add dollar amount. Let's just call it something different other than add amount. So you'll see that it's actually a different prop being passed in. Dollar amount. We're going to name this function right here, and this will be function that fires dispatch, and dispatch takes in an object. Now, first thing it takes in is a type, and this is where the enums come in, so you can just add amount, and it'll import that. And then we also need, for this sake, something else like another type of data. This could be an amount. And in here, we need to pass that through as a parameter. And lastly, we need to connect the map dispatch to props to this add amount. And that's done through this connect function. Now, this first parameter is going to take in map state to props and then map dispatch to props. Oh, in this example, we don't need to map any sort of state to props because we're not really calling the state and we're not putting it in the view layer anywhere. We're just calling dispatch functions. So the first argument is going to be null. And the second argument is going to be map dispatch to props. And the second parameter is just calling this add amount component. And you'll see what we can do. And then furthermore, we can put that into our prop. So add dollar amount. Now let's take a look at the components. Right here, we have add amount, and then we have, see, these two props. And let's see what happens if we just call the add dollar amount. Dollar amount and say 5. And then add dollar amount, say 10. Nothing's happening, but let's check out our provider. And you don't see anything. So what we can do here is actually go to app.js and actually subscribe to our store. And you're subscribing to any changes there. And that's going to take an argument. And that's where we can console log our get state. Now let's see if that does anything. Okay, we have onClick, listen to be a function, got value. Okay, so let's go in here and see if that works. Perfect. And I see that we have our state being updated through the Redux. And this is happening right here. So we can actually just console log something else. Store is being updated. Every time that fires, that should console log that line out. Awesome. So now I'll show you how to map state to props and make sure that this value and this value are getting the most up-to-date state. So let's, before we do that, let's clean up this component so we can get rid of this add amount. Or actually, we can actually change this to add amount. And change this to add amount. Oops, yeah, clean that up. So it all just says add amount and then go into our app.js and get rid of this prop and make sure it still works. Perfect. Okay. And you see that we're not actually passing through anything, but rather we're connecting into our Redux store through this connect function. And we're mapping the dispatch function that we created right here into our into the props of this component. And then we're just calling it. I think that's really cool. Now let's go to our message component and do the same thing. But in this case, we're going to just display the state, not really dispatch anything. So let's do again, connect from React Redux. And then we are going to create a function called map state to props. And that's going to take a parameter of state. And let's just return state and see what happens. State. And then we're going to, again, connect map state to props. And we don't need to do null for the second argument because in map dispatch to props right here, you need something to be in the first place so it knows that this is the second place function or the dispatch function, yes. Now, let's go into actually just props and turn this to test, or no, just turn to 0 for now. Okay, and then let's just console log out our props. And you'll see that we have this count prop right here. That's because the initial, the reducers. The initial state here has a state of count. So let's also add in something like name and see if that works. So we have count and name appear in our message. And then we can also go into make sure that this still works. And we're still seeing that works. And we're seeing that the name of Adam is still there. And you'll notice that we're not overriding this name key or value because we're just spreading in the original state and returning a new one. And that's really the gist of Redux. So let's go back to our message component and in here, we are going to essentially be using the count prop. So again, let's go here. We have count and name, so we just need count. Just throw in count right there. And have count. And that should give us, perfect. That should give us the most up-to-date count from our state. And again, we can go back here, get rid of this guy, and make sure it's still working. Perfect. Now, lastly, we just need to connect the reset amount component to our Redux store. So I'll actually let you pause this video and try it yourself, and then come back and you can kind of watch me do it. Okay, cool. So let's, again, connect, import connect from React Redux. And in here, we're going to, again, map dispatch to props. And it's going to, again, take in dispatch as a parameter. And in here, we're going to create a reset amount function. And we're going to just dispatch object of type of reset amount. Oops. We need to return this object. Awesome. And then again, we need to connect. And first we need to throw in a null, because that's the state, and then map dispatch to props. Cool. So we have 40, 50, 85, reset, boom. So now we need to create a some sort of handler. So you'll see back in the app React Hook structure, we had this reset amount handler, and it had a window confirm in there. So let's do that. So let's create a function called handle reset. And in here, we're just going to call set amount. And then this is actually what we're going to be calling. Make sure that the user gets the confirmation. So we have $30, want to reset it? No, thank you. So nothing happens. Update that to 70, want to reset it? Sure. Boom, back to 0. And there you have it. That's how you really refactor your app to start using Redux. So last thing we need to do before we can actually start cleaning this stuff up is replicate this functionality where we're essentially reading from local storage. Okay, so we're going to create a new function, and we're going to call it local storage. Yes. And in here, we're going to create two functions. One of them is going to be called load state. And in here, we are going to essentially try to retrieve something from our local state. And if nothing happens, we're going to return undefined. So we're also going to do this in a try catch. And it's here. And the catch, we're going to just console error it out. And then return undefined. And we're going to try to do that first. Is we're going to get our raw state. And this is going to try to just call the browser local storage API and do get item with the key of state. And if that doesn't exist, so if raw state is null, we're going to return undefined. But if it does exist, we're going to return a parsed version of that. So we're going to parse that string or whatever we have that serialized state as a JSON object. Cool. And secondly, we need to create a save state function. Oops. state. And in here, we're going to pass in a parameter of state. Again, this is going to be inside of a try catch because browsers are fun and sometimes they'll give errors. So we just want to console error out the error. Just the difference between error and log is error makes the color of the console log red and gives it like a light red background. Cool. So let's actually do that here as well. Okay, cool. So inside this try, we're going to just type in raw state. And we're going to stringify the state that we pass in. And that's just going to create it into a string. And that way we can save it to local state or local storage. And then we're going to local, again, call this API. And we're going to set the item with the key name of state and then raw state. Cool. And now what we need to do is, since we have this subscribe method going on here, so inside this subscribe function that we created, we're just going to call save state in, and we'll see that we have save state from here. Let's just move that up there. And we're going to do store.get state. And we also will need to load state in a sec. But let's see how that works. So to check out your local storage, we just go into DevTools and go into Application. And you'll see our local storage right here. And you'll see this key of state, which is exactly what we want. Refresh it. That's from my test run, but we have this count right here. So let's see what happens when we update our count. We'll see that it creates a new row with a key of state, and it has our entire state object in here. You'll see that it updates state as we update it, and then we can reset it, and it goes back to 0, which is really cool. So what we want to do is make sure that if we have something like this, and we refresh it, it actually populates our Redux store with this data. And that's going to be done using the load state function that we just created. So that's going to be done through our create store. And in here, we're going to create a new variable called persisted state. And this is where we're going to call load state. And just call this guy. And sweet, isn't that cool? So we have this 95 count, refresh it, and it's still in our store. I think that's really cool. So once we reset it, it should go back to 0. Now, lastly, we need to just clean up this app.js file. We don't really need any of the hooks here anymore. So let's get rid of all these guys. And we can get rid of this reset amount prop. And we can even clean this up. And there you have it. There's how you refactor your app to go from local storage and local React hook state to using Redux. And in the next video, I'll show you how to actually set up authentication and set up a Firebase database so you can actually log in as yourself and keep this information wherever you are. You can like log this information on your desktop and then open it up on your phone, log in, and see where you're at dollar-wise. And I think that's going to be a very exciting lesson as well. So I'll see you in the next one.